Let's talk about Holy Week and Christian antisemitism. Yesterday was Palm Sunday, and it marked the beginning of Holy Week, which for many Christians is one of our holiest time periods, but which is also unfortunately a week filled with covert and overt antisemitism. The reality is that some of the most cherished Bible verses used during this week are filled with anti-Semitic language and or interpretations. So when the early Jesus movement began, it was part of Judaism, and so the language and context of the various passages in the New Testament is one of conflict within Judaism. Don't get me wrong, the conflict between the early Jesus movement and wider Judaism doesn't excuse some of the horrific language used in the New Testament against Jewish people. It only explains why the original authors used that language. But Christians today need to grapple with what it means to have those texts as part of our canon. Christians also need to acknowledge how these texts have been used in the past and into the present day to encourage mass violence against Jewish people. However, many Christians, including those who consider themselves to be advocates of social justice, repeat the same anti-Semitic tropes and interpretations that Christians have used for centuries as a justification for violence against Jewish people. For instance, Matthew chapter 21 verses 1 to 11 is often interpreted as the crowds welcoming Jesus on Sunday, then shouting for Jesus' crucifixion later in the week. But as Dr. James McGrath, who serves as the Clarence L. Goodwin Chair in New Testament Language and Literature at Butler University, points out on his Facebook page, there is no evidence that these two crowds are the same. I've heard many pastors, including many progressive pastors, argue that the crowd in Palm Sunday are those who expected Jesus to be a violent revolutionary, and when he wasn't, they turned on him. There is no textual evidence that the crowd that shouts Hosanna and then crucify him are the same crowd. And Dr. McGrath talks about how a lot of preachers are unfamiliar with the historical context in Jesus' times to assert that most people were revolutionaries, and also he argues that this interpretation fails to recognize the implausibility of Jewish crowds calling for a Roman procurator to crucify yet another Jew. The depiction of the crowds as bloodthirsty is one expression of long-standing Christian anti-Judaism. I'm going to make another post because this is longer than I thought, and also I will post a link to my Substack, or you can check the link in my bio.